Hi, I'm Joe Lowery, and I'm glad you've joined me for HTML5 Projects Advanced To-Do List. In this course, I'm going to show you two approaches to integrating to-do lists into your sites. The first is straight up simple. Very basic, but it does the job, so you can easily enter and edit as many list items as you need, and then save them for later if desired, thanks to the wonders of the HTML5 feature, local storage. Then, we'll tackle a much more enhanced version of a to-do list, with bells and whistles galore. Once we're done, your site visitors will be able to add, edit, and delete your list items with ease. They will even be able to sort them in a prioritized order just by dragging them into position. This app takes advantage of some pretty heavy-duty JavaScript, but don't worry, I'll explain how it all works from start to finish. Whichever approach you want to take, basic or advanced, this course will give you the tools to engage your site visitors with a fully interactive feature. Let's get started. I'm very happy to announce that any member of the Lynda Online Training Library, whether premium, monthly, or annual, has access to the exercise files used throughout this title. Naturally, the information in this course is ultimately intended to be applied to your own web pages. However, you may find it helpful to work with the supplied exercise files to practice the steps safely and without creating your own examples. To begin using the files from the site, download them, extract them, and then store those files in a convenient location, such as your desktop, as I have here. When you open up the exercise files folder, you'll find that it's organized by chapter, and that chapters are broken down into the various lessons that you'll see. Within the lesson chapters, there are a series of files, typically HTML, CSS, images, and so forth, all of which are used during the lesson. For most lessons, you'll also find a folder named Final that contains the files showing the completed lesson, which you can open and explore at your leisure. You can either follow the whole course, chapter by chapter, or jump in at any point. If you'd rather not use the exercise files, you can definitely follow along with your own assets. To follow along with this course, the requirements are pretty straightforward. From a tools perspective, you'll need a code editor and a number of browsers for testing. You can use whichever code editor you prefer. I'm going to be working with Aptana on the Mac, a free editor for both Mac and Windows. Most of our browser demonstrations and testing will be using pretty current versions of standard-based browsers like Mozilla Firefox. As the focus in this course is on some of the most recently released technologies, I'll point out where you might run into a problem working with some of the more popular recent browsers. You probably shouldn't depend on the techniques demonstrated if your client needs to support legacy browsers like Internet Explorer 6. That's it for tools. From a knowledge perspective, you should be pretty familiar with both HTML and CSS and have a general understanding of JavaScript. I'll walk through any advanced JavaScript we use block by block, so you can understand what's going on under the hood. Oh, and one last thing. The absolute best thing you can bring to this course is your imagination. Although I'm going to be going through all the details of applying HTML5 technologies to a specific project, you'll get the most benefit if you keep your mind open for other ways you can apply the same lessons to your own work. As I mentioned in the intro, we're actually creating two different to-do list apps, one fairly simple and the other much more enhanced. Let me show you how each of them work so you can get a clearer picture of what's ahead. If you're the type who likes to dive right into the code, you'll find the completed projects in the Chapter 1 01_01 folder. So the basic to-do list that I now have loaded in my browser starts off with a single entry, which I can easily edit. I can also add a new item just by continuing to enter content. So I'll hit return and put down a couple of more items to get. Of course, items can be removed just by selecting and deleting. And if I want to come back later to my list, I can click Save. Let me simulate that by just clicking Refresh. And there's my list still available. Finally, if I want to start over, I'll click Clear All. Now let's take a look at the advanced to-do list. You'll notice it's set up somewhat differently. There is no initial item that acts as a placeholder. Instead, there's just a big old text field and a big old Add to List button. So when I enter an item and then click the button, my new entry will appear below. I can also enter an item, press Tab, and then hit Return or Enter. I'll scroll down a bit to see more of our list. Let me add a couple more items so you can see what else is possible. We'll call Mom, and then we'll walk the dog. Now, I can remove any item by hovering over it and clicking the red X. I can also reorder the list by dragging and dropping any entry's handle. Let's move Call Mom up to the top, followed quickly by Walking the Dog. And if I need to, I can edit any item. Items in this list are stored automatically. There's no need for a Save All link. Let me open this same page in another tab to demonstrate that. I'll copy the URL, create a new tab, and paste it in. And there's my current list. And of course, I have the Clear All feature to start fresh. So there you have it. Now that you've seen the end result, you're ready to step back for a moment to get a better sense of the HTML5 technologies at play. Before we start the actual creation of the projects, let's talk about each of the key technologies being used. Across both projects, there are 3 HTML and related technologies that are being used: Content Editable, Drag and Drop, and Local Storage. Let's start with Content Editable. Basically, this feature makes any page area editable in the browser. It uses a single attribute, Content Editable of course, which can be set to equal to true, equal to false, used by itself, which means true, or inherit, where it will take on the content editable characteristics of its parent. Browser support for Content Editable is just totally off the charts. I was stunned when I looked this up. As you can see, support goes all the way back to Internet Explorer 7. This website, if you're not familiar with caniuse.com, is an essential tool for anyone who's working in HTML5 and related technologies to see what's possible in what browsers. Now let's take a look at drag and drop. There are 2 different aspects to drag and drop. There is a HTML5 attribute, and there's a fairly robust JavaScript API. On the HTML side, we have one attribute called draggable, and it's very similar to Content Editable in that it can be set to true, false, inherit, or just insert it by itself without any equal sign. And if you do it that way, it means that it is draggable. There are 7 different JavaScript events, everything from drag start to drop. These are all used extensively in any drag and drop functionality. There is one key related object that I want to mention, and that's data transfer. As the name implies, this is used to transfer the data from a dragged object. It is initially set in drag start, and then it is put in the drop event. There's pretty good browser support for drag and drop. Let's take a look at Can I Use? As you can see, pretty much all the major players are in line with drag and drop, although we are waiting for Internet Explorer 10 to come out. Finally, let's take a look at local storage. Local storage is very straightforward to use for all that it does, and it does a really wonderful thing. It brings the concept of state to websites without relying on server-side coding. And unlike cookie, which is also used to convey states, it is stored in the browser. It has a much larger limit than cookies, 5 megabytes versus 4 kilobytes, and it uses a very simple name-value pair structure for strings only. Although there are a few other commands for local storage, most of the time you'll be using these 2, setItem and getItem. SetItem takes 2 arguments. The first is the name of the item that you're setting, and the second argument is its value. For getItem, you only need the name. Browser support-wise, we're pretty good. Let's take a look again at Can I Use? And I think we have as solid a support as we've seen for almost any other HTML5 technology. Overall, I think the technologies involved in these projects are full-featured and pretty well supported across the browsers. So let's go build those projects. Do you know how many times I've stared at a web page and thought, boy, I wish I could change that? And did you know that with HTML5, any portion of a web page can be made editable with, literally, a single word? And that word is content editable. We'll apply it to our basic to-do list to get the ball rolling. So I'm going to go to my code editor and scroll down to around line 38 or so, where I have the div with an ID of container and an unordered list with the ID of the list, and my initial entry, enjoy life. So all I need to do here in order to make all the items in the unordered list editable is to put in that one attribute, and we're going to put it right in the UL tag there, and it is content editable. Believe it or not, that's it. Let's save the page and try it out. So I'll go back to the browser, click refresh, and let's just scroll down a little bit. So now I should be able to just click right in here, and let's go ahead and get rid of this placeholder entry here, and I'll put in my own list, quick shopping list of milk, eggs, potatoes, and artichokes. Now, if I want to get rid of something, what I have to do is just go up, highlight it, delete it, and then hit delete or backspace in order to move the list up. It's basically an open entry, and I can put any straight text I want in here. Well, talk about bang for buck. That just blows me away. But of course, there's a hitch. Now, if I refresh the page, as if I came back the next day, all my changes are gone. We can amend that situation pretty quickly, as you'll see in the next lesson. Our content is editable, and now it's time to bring in a little extra functionality to make the app a bit more user-friendly. We want our users to be able to save their edits, if they so desire, so that they can continue making changes at a later date. We also want to give our users the ability to remove all list items. For both these goals, we turn to the HTML5 technology known as local storage. Let's start by setting up our triggers, two links which we'll place right below the list items that you see here. So we're going to place this, as I said, right after the closing UL tag here, and we'll put it in its own paragraph. So let's put in the first link. So because we're just going to be using the link as a trigger of sorts, we'll set the href equal to JavaScript void. Put that semicolon there. And we want to be sure to give this link an ID, and this ID will be save all. And within the link, we'll put the keywords save all. Let me hit return so we can put our next link on another line. And again, it's going to be a href equals javascript.void, open and close paren, semicolon, also with an ID, except this ID is clear all. We close the tag and put in the text, clear all. With our links established, we're ready to code their functions. So for that, we'll scroll down to the bottom of the page, and we're going to put this right after the script tag that calls jQuery. And this is a custom script tag. We'll set the type equal to text JavaScript. Close that and make a couple of lines for our code. Now we'll put in the jQuery document ready function, starting with the $, and then document in parentheses, dot ready, followed by parentheses function and its own pair of parentheses. And then we'll make a little space and put in the curly brace, and then hit return to move that all the way down. Now, before I forget, I'm going to go ahead and put a semicolon at the end of that function call. Next, we want to declare a variable, which I'm going to call the list. And I want to set this equal to document.getElementById. And the element by ID that we're getting is for the unordered list, which has an ID of the list. Semicolon at the end. Now we're ready to code the first of two click functions. This one will target the save all link. So we'll put in our $, and then the parentheses for the selector with a single quote, and then it's pound save all dot click function. And within the parentheses following function, put an E for error, and then move your cursor outside of the parentheses and put in a curly brace and then return. And again, we'll put in our semicolon. So the first thing we want to do here is to type prevent default. And that will stop the browser from expecting the link to be an actual link and not a trigger as we're using it here. Again, a semicolon at the end. And now we'll bring in local storage. If they click the Save All link, we want to use local storage to set item, and that item we'll call to-do list. And what are we going to put in to-do list? Well, we're going to put in the list, that's the unordered list, inner HTML. So that will be all of the tags that are contained within the unordered list. Okay, a semicolon there. Because this next function is pretty similar, I'm just going to copy what we just did and then paste that in. Now, instead of being triggered by Save All, this is going to be triggered by the link with an ID of Clear All. We'll keep the click function and prevent default. But now we don't want to set an item. In fact, we want to clear all the items. And the function for that is just clear. Now, there's one last bit of code that needs to go in here. Once you've cleared the items, in order for that change to be reflected on the page, you'll have to reload the page. And the way to do that is to type location.reload. Follow that with a pair of parentheses and a semicolon, and those functions are done. We're not quite finished. Now we have to bring in the local storage items when the page loads, which we'll do by putting on its own line the function called load to do, which is a call to a custom function we're just about to create. So function load to do, open and close parentheses, and then on the other side of those, curly brace. Now we only want to attempt to load in these entries if they exist. If we do it and there are no entries there, it's very possible that an error could be thrown. So let's check by using an if statement. If, and then open and close parentheses, local storage dot get item, and the item we're checking on is, of course, the to-do list. If that item exists, then let's set the list's inner HTML equal to that local storage get item. So I'm just going to highlight that, copy it, paste it in, and close it out with a semicolon. As I scanned over my code before I save the page, I realized that I've left off a parentheses here. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that in. It's always a good idea to check your code one last time for those missing elements. And that also indicates that I've got an error there. That was that parentheses that got moved down. But otherwise, I think this looks pretty good. So let's save the page and head over to the browser. I'll click refresh. Let's scroll down a bit. And let's enter in a couple of items here. I thought maybe I would enter in a few movies that I've been wanting to see again. Of course, Jaws is at the top of that list. And then perhaps Watchmen. Big, I always like. And then the animated feature 9. Let's save all. And then I'm going to copy this link, open up a new browser window, and paste it in. And there are our list items. Good to go. But let's say I've watched all my flicks, and now I'm ready to move on. I'll clear the list. And we're back to the default entry. Perfect. Our basic to-do list is up and running. Most of the action in the advanced to-do list is on the JavaScript front, but we do have some essential HTML to put in place first. So let's get to it. I have opened the index.html file from the Chapter 3 0301 folder of the exercise files. It's important to note that for this advanced to-do list, you'll need to preview your documents through a local or remote web server. I'm using the local web server MAMP, so my files are located in that app's htdocs folder. The code we want to work with is in a div a little bit later down the page, so let me scroll down a bit, and here you see it on lines 41 and 42. It's a div with the ID of container. I'm going to make a little space in the middle there, do a little indentation, and then add in my code. First, I'll need to put in the form that will hold the input field so that the user can type in his or her list item. So I'll enter a simple name, form1, give it a method of post, and we'll leave the action empty. So let's put in our input field first. With a type of text, I'm going to give this the name to-do item, and we'll use that same thing for the ID. And I'm going to take advantage of one of the more recent HTML5 properties that's become quite useful and prevalent in browser support, and that's autofocus. All right, we have our input tag, and of course, we're also going to need a submit button to add that entry, whatever it is, to the list. So another input tag. This has a type of button. The name is add to do. And as before, we'll do ID, the same as the name, add to do. And the value, the label, if you will, that will appear in the button, add list item. And then we'll close off the tag. Our form has already been closed for us. So next, we need to build up our list. There's not much building to do here, as all the list items will be added dynamically via JavaScript. All we need to do is add a UL tag with an ID and a couple of classes to structure our unordered list. So UL, we'll give it an ID of the list. And I need to put in two classes here, sortable and list. We'll be using those both for CSS purposes and JavaScript purposes. I close the tag, and Aptana closes off my tag pair. I'll just give it a little extra helping hand there, showing that that's where our additional list items will appear. Now finally, after the UL tag closes off, I'll add a paragraph tag to hold my clear all link. So we'll put in a paragraph with an ID of do clear all. Close the opening paragraph tag, and then we'll add in a link with an ID equal to clear all. And the href is just going to be JavaScript :void, open and close parentheses, semicolon, because we're just getting that link. And then after the quote, we'll close off our tag and put in the text clear all. And that's all the HTML she wrote. JavaScript will really be doing the heavy lifting for this app. And now we're ready to start on it in the next lesson. In this lesson, we'll add the JavaScript code to insert a new list item. Sounds simple, right? Well, our list item is going to be dynamic, editable, draggable, and deletable, if that's even a word. So it's got a lot going on. Consequently, there's a fair amount of JavaScript involved. Don't worry though, I'll guide you every step of the way. I've got the index.htm file from the Chapter 3 0302 folder open in my code editor now. Let's scroll all the way to the bottom so we can put in our JS after the page loads. Now, I've already got my call to jQuery in place right down there on line 150, just above the closing of the body tag. But I need one other helper. I'm going to add a link to a jQuery plugin called HTML5 Sortable by Iranian developer Ali Faradi. HTML5 Sortable is a lighter version of the jQuery UI sortable routine with some additional functionality. It makes using the HTML5 drag and drop API a lot easier. I've already downloaded mine, and now let's head back to the code so I can link to it. So I'll put my cursor right after the call to jQuery, and I'll enter in a script tag, set the type to text JavaScript, and the source, or src, will go to my _scripts folder, and the name of the file we're looking for is jQuery.sortable.js. I'll close off my script tag, and that's all I need there. As I said, the JavaScript for this section is a bit involved, so I've created a code snippet to bring it in without having to type in every line. Let's take a look at it. You'll find it in the _assets folder, and it's called snippet.js. We start by ensuring that the code doesn't launch until the document is ready, using our document_ready function. Next, we set up a series of variables. The first one is used to hold the code for the new list item. The second one is a flag to determine whether we've already begun a list or not. The third one, the list, uses standard JavaScript syntax to get the UL list object. Now we go to our main routine, starting on line 6. This will trigger if the Add to List button, which has the ID of Add to Do, is clicked. We want to not actually submit the form, so in the next line, we prevent the default behavior. Next, we test to see if this is the first time a new list item has been added by checking our flag. If so, we get the value from the input field and then build up our list item code. You can see that code on line 10. Let's go through this bit by bit. First, there's the opening li tag, followed by a span with a class of handle. This is the two colons that form our gripper handle for moving the list item. After the closing span tag is an input field where the list item goes. You may be wondering why we're using an input rather than the HTML5 content editable attribute. Unfortunately, there's a pretty major conflict between the draggable API and content editable in the current crop of WebKit and Blink browsers. That's iOS and Google Chrome. Whether it's as designed or a design flaw doesn't really matter right now. What does matter is that you can't currently use content editable on dynamically inserted draggable items. So I've switched things up a bit and gone back to the old reliable input field, which drags just fine, thank you very much. Now back to our list item. The last element after the input tag is a link for removing that list item, basically a big red X. Once that's all set, we'll change our new list flag to false. That happens on line 11. Now, if this isn't the first list item, we get the to-do entry as before on line 13, and then next we clone the last item in the list and then substitute its value attribute with the one that the user entered. Pretty cool, right? Next up is a bit of code to determine whether to show the clear all link or not. It's hidden when the list is empty or when there's just one list item, because that can always be removed by clicking the red X. So we get the number of list items, and if there's more than one, we show the paragraph that holds the clear all link. Let's scroll down a bit. Now on line 23, we're ready to add our new item. Next, we just have a little housekeeping to keep things neat and tidy. First, we'll clear out the value that the user put in to the Add New Item list, and then we reset its focus so that the user can make another item entry very easily. Finally, we bring our HTML5 sortable library into play. To make sure we're starting from a clean slate, we actually get rid of it first, if it does exist. And then we set it up and target the span with a class of handle to act as our, handle. So that's the full code breakdown. Let's select the entire block and then copy it and go back to our index.html file. After the call to jQuery sortable.js, I'll enter in a new script tag, give it a type also of text JavaScript. And then within that tag, paste in our snippet. With our major building block in place, we can now save our file, and we're ready for the next step, handling the edits. This lesson is a bit of a mixed bag. We need to add 3 small functions to handle 3 different tasks. First, we want to make sure that the main input field works properly if the user should press enter or return. Then, we want to update the value of a list item that's being edited. And finally, we want to lay the groundwork for reacting when an item is dragged to a new location. So I thought, who doesn't love a little potpourri every now and then? Let's get started. Here's the index.html file from the Chapter 3 0303 folder. Let's go back down to the bottom of the page to add in our JavaScript code. We already have a mechanism in place to handle the user clicking on the Add to List button. That's all the code that we inserted in the last lesson. But what happens if someone types in a new list item and, naturally, hits Enter or Return? Well, it actually blanks out our existing list at this point, not what we want to have happen at all. So let's add a little code block that looks for an Enter or Return and deals with it appropriately. We're going to put this within our document ready function, but after the add to list item function. So I'll open up a couple of lines there, and we'll start off with the jQuery $, and then our selector. Make sure we put it in parentheses and single quotes. And this is going to be an input tag with the type equal to double quotes text. And then after the closing parentheses, dot and on. So what we're doing now is setting up the selector for the right kind of input tag, and then look for the key down event. We're using the .on syntax from jQuery that asks for first the event, and we'll use the key down event in single quotes, followed by comma and function, followed by parentheses with the E for error handling inside of that, and then a curly brace to hold our code. Now we'll eventually need to close off the parentheses that we put in right after on, so I'll go ahead and add that in as well as a closing semicolon. I can forget that from time to time, so for me personally it's always good to go ahead and put that down. Next, we'll set up a variable to get the actual character code. We're going to need to use a slightly complex conditional statement to cover all of our bases. So follow along carefully. Set the variable to key, And we'll set that equal to e.charcode, short for character code, of course, followed by question mark, and again, e.charcode, colon, and then basically the same thing again, but with key code. Key code, question mark, e.keycode, colon, 0. Close all that off with a semicolon. Now, once we get our key, we check to see if the key is equal to 13. 13 is the value for the enter or the return key. And if we have that, we'll do a couple things. First, we'll stop it from its normal functioning. Then we'll put the focus on the next input field, which happens to be our submit button. And to do that, we'll put in a couple lines of code. First, we'll create a variable called inputs and set that equal to whatever field we're on using the jQuery this operator, followed by a dot closest, another jQuery conceit, within the form, in parentheses, dot find, open parentheses, single quotes, colon, input, colon, visible. Close off your parentheses and the line with a semicolon. Let me scroll us down a little bit here so you can see that easier. Next, we're going to set the focus, as I said. We'll put in our variable name, inputs, where it's equal to inputs.index this plus 1, that moves it out 1, dot focus. All right, that function's complete. Now, we want to handle any edits that we make to our list items. We're going to look for a change event for the class .listItem, which is inside the list. So let's set up our event handler. And I'll start off with pointing to the list as a selector. This is the UL tag that holds all of our list items. And we'll use .on, open a parentheses. The event we're looking for is change. And then we're going to target a specific class within the list. And that's the class of the list item itself, which not coincidentally is called list item. So .list item. And then after that, single quote, another comma, and we open up our function, again with E as the error handler. And let's put our closing curly brace, and after our closing parentheses and semicolon. So now within that function, once this event is triggered, we'll pick up the just entered current value. So this is going to be a variable called current value, and we'll set that equal to this.val. This is the value for the input field that's in the list item that the user is changing. And once we have that, we can swap out the input field's attribute. So again, we'll use the jQuery this, and we want to change an attribute. So we use .attr, open parentheses. What attribute do we want to change? We want to change the one called value. And what do we want to change it to? Our variable current value. Now we need to do it this way rather than just use the jQuery val property to ensure that the DOM is changed, which is critical for saving our list later. Finally, let's make a little bit more room. We're going to create a, for now, empty little function that checks to see if our list has been resorted. We'll need this when it comes time to automatically save our list. This functionality is, frankly, a bit of a bear with the standard drag and drop API, but the HTML5 sortable plugin makes it really straightforward. So it's basically a binding. We'll pinpoint our class of sortable, and then after the parentheses, we're calling the sortable function, and we'll bind that using the sort update event, and we'll set up a function. Again, followed by a curly brace, and then close off that curly brace with the closing parentheses and semicolon. Okay, that's all we need for now. I'll save the page, and in the next lesson, we'll put in the code for removing list items, both individually and collectively. One of my greatest joys in life is marking items off my list. I've even been known to write out a list item, even though I've already done it, just so I can scratch it out. What can I tell you? In this lesson, we'll add the functionality to remove list items one at a time, as well as wire up our clear all link so we can get rid of them all quickly and easily. Now we have the index.html file from the Chapter 3 0304 folder open in our code editor. To the bottom of the page we go, where the JavaScript lies. And we'll go all the way to the bottom and add in our next set of functions. So I need 3 functions to remove list items properly. One, to show the red X when the user mouses over the list item. Another to hide that red X when he or she mouses out. And then a third to delete the list item when the X is clicked. All 3 use the jQuery on function to detect event triggering. So we're going to put the first of these after our sortable update code block. Now, the red X is hidden by default by CSS. So let's add code first to show it on mouse over. I'll put in my jQuery $sign for the selector, a pair of parentheses and a pair of single quotes. And we start by targeting the list. That's the UL tag, dot on, and then parentheses in single quotes, mouse over. Follow that with a comma. And then we put in the item within the list that we're actually targeting, which is LI. Follow that with another comma, and then open up a function, its own set of parentheses, and then a curly brace. And I'll make a little room and put in my semicolon. So the first thing we need to do once this event is triggered is to find the anchor tag, that's the A tag, within this particular list item. So I'm going to set up a variable, call it this A, and set that equal to $ parentheses this. That's going to refer to the particular list item that was mouse overed. Dot find, and what are we looking for? It's the A tag in single quotes. Put a semicolon at the end of that. And now once we have that, we can target the variable, this A. We'll change the display property, which I'll put in single quotes, and follow that by whatever it is we're going to change it to, and we're going to change it to block. Semicolon at the end, and this little code block's done. Now the next code block, where I hide the X on mouse out, is pretty similar. So let's just copy and paste the one we just did and make some changes. So I'll select it starting on line 204, go all the way down, copy that, paste it in, and then we'll change mouse over to mouse out and change display block to display none. Okay, now we're ready to actually remove the list item. And this will happen if the user clicks the X link. So again, we'll use the on event to trigger it, but we'll look for a click. So start off by targeting the outer list. Follow that with dot on, and then open and close parentheses. Our event is click, comma. What we're actually targeting has a class name of remove list item. That's the anchor tag. And then we'll put in our function with an E for error handling and our open and close curly brace. And let's not forget our closing semicolon there. Now, because we are clicking on a link, we don't want it to go to that link. So we'll use the e.prevent_default to prevent the default behavior. And then we just need one line of code to remove the item. So we want to, again, use the jQuery this operator. Now, the this in this case that it's referring to is the anchor tag. And we don't want to remove just the anchor tag. We want to remove what's surrounding the anchor tag, its parent, in other words. So I'll put in parent and open and close parentheses, and then function remove. Close that off with a semicolon, and we're done. Okay, our individual list items are handled. Now let's bring our clear all link online. Again, we'll use the on function and prevent the normal default action of clicking a link. So let's start there. This time, we're going to be targeting the ID do clear all. This is the ID that's assigned to the paragraph tag that's holding the clear all link. And we'll do dot on, open and close parentheses. The event is click. What we're targeting is the link that has an ID of clear all, and put in a function for it. We'll use our E for error handling, open and close curly brace, close it off with a semicolon. And as I said, we want to prevent that normal default action from occurring. So e.prevent_default. Now comes the code to remove all the children of the list, which is all the list items. And that's easy. It's just one line of code. So we'll target the list, more specifically, the children of the list. And what do we want to do? Remove it. Not too difficult, right? Finally, time for a little more cleanup. First, because we've gotten rid of all the list items, we're going to reset the new list flag to true. Then we're going to clear out the input field, just in case there's anything left in there. The ID for that element is to-do item, and we'll just set its value, its val, to nothing. Now, because we have no list items, we don't want our clear all showing, so we're going to hide the clear all link. You'll recall that the ID for the paragraph holding that is the one that's at the top of this code block, and that's do clear all. And we'll set the CSS property of display to none. Now, finally, we're going to reset the focus to our input field. And you can do that after identifying it by just putting in dot focus parentheses. I'll save my page. And now we're actually ready to tackle the final task, saving and restoring our list automatically. In the basic version of the to-do list, we had a link for saving the list whenever you wanted. But that's a little, well, basic, don't you think? It'd be much better if we could automagically store and retrieve the list. And that's what we'll do in this final lesson of the advanced to-do list, courtesy of the HTML5 functionality local storage. So now we see index.html file from the chapter 30305 folder open. And again, let's head down south in the file, all the way down towards the bottom. Now I'm going to stop around line 158 so we can see the bulk of our add to do on click function. Because we need to store our list under a number of different scenarios, we're going to be adding the same code to 5 different existing code chunks. We're going to put our first one right at the end of this routine for adding a new list item. So I'll scroll down just a little bit there. And right after the sortable group, we'll create a new line. And the code that we're going to use throughout is just a single line. And it's local storage with an uppercase S dot set item, open and close parentheses, and 2 arguments. The first is the name of the local storage item we want to set. And I've called this to-do list plus. That's just to differentiate it from the to-do list, which was the basic one, comma. And then what are we putting in there? We're putting in the list. You'll recall that was one of the variables that we set up front, dot inner HTML. And that's all we need. So now what I'm going to do is just copy this line and start to put it in the other locations that we need it. Another time that we want to automatically save is after we make any edits to the list items. So let me scroll down a tad, and there on line 198 is the list on change. And I'm going to add in my missing little semicolon here, and then paste in my local storage line. Naturally, we also want to remember any updates to the order of the list. So let's fill out that sortable function next, which is right after that. I'll tab in a little bit here, paste in my code. It looks like I have forgotten to put the semicolon after that. So let me go back and correct that mistake so it doesn't come back to haunt us. And I'll scroll back down. Let me recapture that with the semicolon so I don't repeat that error. Now, we certainly don't want any removed items left hanging around. So let's add the local storage code to the remove list item function. Starts on line 218. Finally, we certainly want to remember that we've cleared out the list if we do. So let me scroll all the way down. So let's add the code to our do clear all on click function. That takes care of the storing of the list items, but what about the retrieving? Well, that needs to happen whenever the page loads. So we're going to write one function, which will be called whenever that takes place. And we'll handle that by putting the function call in the root of document ready. So right after the do clear all, I'm going to create a couple of lines, and we'll call this function load to do. And I'll scroll down a bit so we can start in a good place. Now let's create the function. Put in the keyword function, my function name, load to do, open and close parentheses, no arguments, and open and close curly brace. And the first thing we want to do is to check if our local storage item exists. No reason to do anything if it doesn't. So if local storage.getItem, open and close parentheses, single quotes, and we put in the name of our local storage item, which is to-do list plus. And then following the second closing parentheses, we put in a curly brace pair. So if our local storage item exists, we want to get it and then set it to the inner HTML of the list. So the list.innerHTML, set that equal to local storage.getItem, and the name of the item again, to-do list plus. The rest is really just housekeeping, but kind of essential housekeeping. We first need to make sure that it's sortable by bringing in our sortable routines. So I'll scroll up to line 180 and grab the lines of code through 183, copy that, scroll back down, and we'll paste it in. See what kind of manipulation with tabs that I have to work with here. Looks like I need to do a little adjusting to make it all line up properly. After the sorting has been re-enabled, we want to either show or not show the clear all link according to the number of list items. So we've already written that code. Let's go grab that. That starts on line 170. So I'll select and copy that and paste it in. Let me select again and tab it over. And I'll get rid of this extra line here so everything neatens up. Okay, all done. Let's save our page and fire this puppy up. So I'm going to go back to Chrome where I've got the page already set up. Now before I hit refresh, I want to show you how you can deal with local storage during your testing phase for your app. Now if you're working with Chrome, you can go to View, Developer, Developer Tools, and then click on Resources. Now, I'll stress that this is for Chrome. It's also similar in Safari. Firefox has its own set of developer tools, but both allow you to see what local storage there is if you use it at all. So if we had any, if you recall during the demo, I cleared out all the items at the end of each of the 2 demos, one for basic and one for advanced. So we don't really have any local storage here now, but if we did, it would show up here. And I'll show you that in just 1 second. So let me close this now, and I'll hit refresh. And let's go ahead and try out our list items. As you can see, when I hit refresh, we went to the field. That's our little autofocus working. So I'll put in get milk, and let's click on our add list item this time. That works. All right, let's add in another one. Let's see, wait for tonight. This time I'll press tab and hit enter. Well, that worked. Let me scroll down. And there's our clear all. And as you can see, our X's are showing up. Let's add one more list item. And this is a shout out to all those Pinky in the Brain fanatics still out there, where they always waited for tonight to try and take over the world. You got to keep Pinky and the Brain alive, you know. So let's test some functionality. Let's try our editing. So instead of get milk, let's change that to missiles. And maybe we'll get the missiles later in the evening and then try to take over the world. Okay. Well, maybe we won't even wait for tonight. Let's get rid of that. Okay. So now I'm ready to refresh the page to see if our local storage is working correctly. I'll click refresh. And it looks good. Now, before I do the final test of clearing out the list, I want to show you what the local storage looks like from the developer perspective. So let's go to View, Developer, Developer Tools, and we're already on the Resources tab. So I'll expand local storage this time, and there's my local host local storage. There's the To-Do List Plus entry, and as you can see, it's a series of list items. Perfect. Let's try Clear All, and we're back to square one. Excellent. Job well done. Your advanced to-do list is now fully operational. Thanks for watching HTML5 Projects Advanced To-Do List. I hope you'll find numerous uses for the 2 projects we covered in the course. Be sure to check out my other courses now available in the online training library here at lynda.com. And have a great day.